Welcome back to World History, continuing on the war to end all wars, or so they thought. If you guys haven't noticed, I've added an extra video that I found online that just kind of goes into greater detail into other people's opinions on how World War I affected things, either during the war or even the consequences because of the war. So if you're interested in a little more information that's not coming from my voice, there is the video there. Number 3, the war at sea. Last thing you wrote down had to do with submarines, so let's talk about the war at sea. Both sides understood the importance of winning the war at sea. Early on in the fighting, the British Navy blockaded German ports, and German submarines surrounded Britain. Germany even warned passengers who were sailing to Britain from the U.S., don't go on the ships. You might be attacked. This is a state of war. Be careful. And then we had the sinking of the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a British ship that was sunk by German submarines. British ship sunk by German submarines. Almost 1,200 people died, including 128 Americans. That sinking and others touched off a storm of protests in America that forced Germany to temporarily curtail their submarine attacks. Well, the question is, who is to blame for the sinking of the Lusitania? The submarine, because they are the ones who shot it down. Yes, but also the ship was going into a war zone. They had been warned not to, and yet they did anyways. Prevented from using their submarines, Germany decided to use their fleet to try to break the blockade. The Battle of Jutland takes place. Although Britain suffered more damage than Germany, the blockade remained intact, and the German fleet remained in port where it would stay for the rest of the war. So what you need to know about the Battle of Jutland, it was a naval battle between the British and Germans. Britain won, which meant the British blockade continued. German generals began demanding that an all-out submarine campaign was Germany's only hope for winning the war. They used battleships in the Battle of Jutland. That wasn't enough. Some feared that the U.S. might join the war, but Wilhelm II favored the submarine campaign. It was called unrestricted submarine warfare. That's the idea of sinking all ships, armed or not, that carried supplies to the Allies. That's what you need to know about it. Within a year, over 3,000 ships were sunk, but the Allies began to overcome these losses by improving their methods of anti-submarine warfare. On page 442, I want you to read the pink box entitled The War and the Colonies, because understand World War I involved countries that had colonies around the world, whether that was in the South Pacific or in Africa. So please read that pink box. Once you have finished reading, please unpause and we will continue. Number 4, the war on the home front. Before the 20th century, most civilians were unaffected by ongoing wars. Life was business as usual beyond the battlefields, but with World War I, warfare changed. Total War. Not only is it a great gaming company that makes some pretty awesome games, Total War, definition for you is it affects the civilian population. Let's describe a few things about Total War. Letter A, political control became more centralized. That means the government took more control of the lives of the people during this war. In most of the warring nations, a group of generals or a small, tightly knit cabinet made decisions and implemented policies. Letter B, government rigidly controlled the economy. As the war dragged on, the tremendous cost was felt at home. Morale began to decline. Strikes and food riots plagued Germany. Famine swept through the Balkans, and rebellion will break out in Russia. Turn in your books, please, to page 449, and read about the religious dimensions of the war in the pink box. Once you have finished reading, please unpause, and we'll continue. Number 5, the collapse of Russia. Wait, which side was Russia on in this war? That's right, the Allies. Russia had been totally unprepared for a long war. As the war continued to go bad, revolution broke out. Nicholas II, and the thing you need to know about him is he was the last Tsar of Russia, CZAR. He was the last Tsar of Russia before abdicating his throne. Russia will continue trying to fight the war against Germany under a provisional government, but more revolution broke out and communism took over. We'll go into more details about that next chapter. End result was the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Thing you need to know about this treaty is it took Russia out of the war. If you're looking at the map up here, you can see where the Germans had pushed into Russia. And the treaty itself, the black line, stands for the territory that Germany was able to gain from the Russians. So definitely a large chunk of Russia was lost because of this treaty. Russia agreed to give up 1.3 million square miles, which included 60 million people, as well as a large chunk of its coal mines and industry. Germany gained access to badly needed raw materials, and most importantly, Germany could now move its eastern troops to France, where it could possibly win the war. There is a debate that goes on right now as to whether or not U.S. involvement in World War I was significant. Some theories claim that, the Allies would have won the war anyways. It's just the U.S. helped bring the war to a close faster. Another theory claims that if it weren't for the U.S., the possibility is that the Central Powers could have won the war. With Russia out of the war, the Central Powers could have focused their entire attention on France and possibly won the war. I tend to lean towards the second argument, that American involvement was essential for the Allies to win, but it's debatable. You can do your own research and decide for yourself. The president at the time of the U.S. was Woodrow Wilson. There's a quote associated with him that's worth remembering: "The world must be made safe for democracy." The world must be made safe. This was the idea that the U.S. was not coming into this war for more territory, for more land, for more power. They were just trying to make the world safe for democracy. They wanted peace. They wanted democracy to flourish around the world. So why did the U.S. join? Letter A. One, probably the most obvious reason, was they were angered by Germany's submarine warfare. They regarded the sinking of unarmed merchant ships without warning as immoral conduct and as a violation of international law. Letter B. U.S. did have close ties with France and Britain. The U.S. enjoyed bonds of language and cultural heritage with England. The U.S. also felt they had a debt to pay to France for helping them win the American Revolution. Also, the U.S. had been on friendly terms with France and Britain throughout most of the 19th century. Letter C. Britain also uncovered a German plot to bring Mexico in the war against the U.S. This was called the Zimmermann Telegram. The Germans promised Mexico the southwest of the U.S. if Mexico declared war on the U.S. Letter D. Allied propaganda turned American opinion against Germany. American newspapers received nearly all of their war news from the British, and the British often exaggerated stories and incidents to stir up anti-German sentiment. Whether it was true or false, the British reported on it. Letter E. There was also close monetary ties to the Allies. American businessmen and farmers profited from British and French purchases of American goods. American bankers had loaned large sums of money to the French and British governments too. These Americans did not want to lose their markets or their investments. Letter F. To maintain the balance of power in Europe. The U.S. feared what would happen if a victorious Germany, with its strong militaristic ways, were to dominate Europe. So, in 1917, the U.S. declares war on Germany. Since the U.S. did not have a large, well-trained army at first, American soldiers provided little help to the Allies until 1918. General John J. Pershing, thing you need to know about him is he was the leader of the American Expeditionary Force. This force would provide the necessary edge to finally end the war. In the last months of fighting, over 250,000 American troops landed in France every month. Letter C, conclusion of the war. Germany made a last attempt to win the war before U.S. forces could turn the tide against them. With Russia out, German veterans from the Eastern Front arrived in France and launched a massive assault toward Paris. Again, it looked like French and British forces were about to collapse. General Ferdinand Foch. The thing you need to know about Foch is he was the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces in France. He was the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces in France. By the way, page 444 again shows you the bottom map, shows you the deepest German penetration, so you can see how far they are able to get compared to the 1914 trenches that you see with the dotted lines. So they were able to expand until this moment. Foch believed that a battle won is a battle in which one is not able to believe oneself vanquished. Another quote says, "A battle is lost when you admit defeat." With U.S. reinforcements, the Allies mounted a counterattack and pushed the Germans back. If you read page 451, I know we're skipping all these different pages. Please read the Profiles Encourage box to yourself. Once you have finished, please unpause and we'll continue. Germany's allies began to collapse. In September, Bulgaria surrendered. By early November, Austria and the Ottomans surrendered. The term is armistice. Definition of an armistice is a temporary cessation, cessation, of fighting. Germany asked Wilson for an armistice, but the U.S. refused Kaiser's request. Mutinies and revolts broke out across Germany. Wilhelm II fled to the Netherlands, and a German republic replaced the Second German Reich. Leaders of the new government agreed to an armistice. On November 11th, 1918, on a very testable date, the armistice was signed, ending World War I. The signing took place at 11 a.m., so it occurred on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. This war proved to be the most deadly and costly war in world history up to that time. It is estimated that 10 million soldiers died, 20 million were wounded, and 6 million were missing. Civilian life through starvation, disease, massacres, submarines, etc. were about the same. It is estimated that over the course of the war, 15,000 people died every day. The cost of the war is estimated about $200 billion, while indirect costs totaled over $151 billion. It is estimated that the war cost approximately $9 million an hour. How do you measure personal suffering or the loss of a generation of young men? I don't know if you can, but that's exactly the consequence of World War I. The difference between this war and the previous wars was that new technology increased man's destructive power. Man had not become more civilized. Man had just found more efficient means to kill one another. That's all we're going to cover for today. For tomorrow, please make sure you do the quiz, pages 443 to 452. That quiz is in your handout. Hope you all have a good rest of the day. Be good, do good. Bye.